What is a cell?
Cells are basic structures that make up all living things. The smallest organisms, like bacteria, can be made up of only a single cell. These are known as single-celled organisms. Other organisms, like animals or humans, are made up of many, many cells. The size of a typical cell is very small, usually on the scale of 10 to 4 or 10 to 5 meters. This is small enough that we can't see it with our eyes. But only under a microscope where cells are readily visible.
What chemicals are typically analyzed in a urine analysis?
Just like a blood analysis, there are several analytes that can be looked at by urine analysis. pH, density, proteins, glucose, ketones, leukocytes, blood. Or human chorionic gonadotropin, the presence of which can indicate pregnancy. The results can indicate several things about a person's health. If the person is well hydrated, for example, a lower density would be expected. The presence of proteins in the urine is uncommon. And this may indicate that the patient's kidneys are not functioning properly. Similarly, glucose and ketones should not be present in the urine. But if they are, their presence could be a symptom of diabetes.
What is dilution?
Process that lowers the concentration of a substance.
How does materials science help to keep your home warm in the winter?
By designing effective ways to insulate your home, of course. In total, 48% of the energy used annually in the US is spent on heating buildings during the colder seasons and keeping them cooled during the warmer seasons. Insulation materials help to maintain the temperature differences inside and outside of buildings. In addition to polystyrene and other types of insulation, materials to seal window panes and other potential leaks can significantly reduce the amount of energy we need to spend on heating and cooling.
What can go wrong if errors are present in DNA?
If errors do occur during DNA replication, they can have serious biological and physiological effects. Many diseases are believed to be associated with errors in genetic sequences, including cystic fibrosis, sickle cell anemia, hemophilia, Huntington's disease, Tay-Sachs disease, and a number of other genetic disorders. Other diseases or disorders may be linked to your genetics in a more complicated manner, such that you are more or less likely to suffer from them than the rest of the population. Some such diseases/disorders are cancers, mental/mood disorders, asthma, heart disease, and diabetes. Fortunately, we have several DNA repair mechanisms that are constantly on the lookout for damaged DNA.
What is spectroscopy?
Spectroscopy is a branch of science associated with using light to study transitions between energy levels. Not all scientists who use spectroscopy, spectroscopists, are physical chemists. Though physical chemists, and physicists, are typically the people who develop new spectroscopic methods and experimentally investigate the details of how light interacts with matter. Data collected in spectroscopic experiments is typically presented as some response of an atomic or molecular system as a function of frequency/wavelength or time. When the response is plotted as a function of frequency/wavelength, it is called a spectrum.
Why would anyone add carbon monoxide to tuna?
Cutting a tuna fish exposes many muscle cells to oxygen, which slowly changes the bright red color of fresh tuna steaks to a darker brown. This is the result of iron-containing enzymes, myoglobin and hemoglobin, being oxidized from Fe2 to Fe3. Sushi lovers have come to understand that fresh raw tuna should be bright red and are skeptical of eating any brown-colored fish. The seafood industry figured out at some point that adding Co during the packaging step not only slows the rate of oxidation down, which increases shelf life, but also brightens the red color. It does this because Co binds more strongly to the Fe2 center than Fe3. The risk to consumers is not Co exposure here, but that you might be fooled into eating fish that isn't as fresh as you might otherwise think if you judge its freshness based on color.
What is a triple point?
The combination of temperature and pressure values at which solid, liquid, and gas phases of a substance are in equilibrium.
What is the partial pressure of a species in a gas?
If you have a rigid container containing a mixture of gases, the partial pressure of a species is simply the pressure the gas would have if that one species occupied the entire volume of the container.
Why did Carrie B. Mullis, United States, win the Nobel Prize for Chemistry?
For contributions to the developments of methods within DNA-based chemistry for his invention of the polymerase chain reaction. PCR, method, and Michael Smith, Canada. For contributions to the developments of methods within DNA-based chemistry, for his fundamental contributions to the establishment of oligonucleotide-based site-directed mutagenesis and its development for protein studies. Mullis was awarded the prize for developing a widely used laboratory method called the polymerase chain reaction, PCR, method. PCR allows the use of relatively simple lab equipment to generate millions of copies of a sample of DNA in the time span of only a few hours. This has found diverse applications in a large number of laboratories. It can be used, for example, to generate copies of DNA from fossils of organisms that are long since extinct. Smith shared the prize with Mullis for his work manipulating the genetic code. In cells, proteins are produced based on sequences of nucleotides contained within the organism's DNA. These sequences dictate the sequences of amino acids that will be incorporated into a protein. Smith developed a method to selectively manipulate DNA to alter the amino acid sequences of the proteins that are produced.
What metal is at work in alcohol dehydrogenase in your liver?
The active site of alcohol dehydrogenase contains a zinc center that is responsible for catalyzing the reaction of ethanol to acetaldehyde.
What is an alkali metal?
Group 1 of the periodic table, i.e., Li, Na, K, Rb, Cs, Fr.
What is a CD made of?
All types of optical discs, CDs, DVDs, Blu-ray, R, discs, etc., have basically the same components. The outer layer of clear polycarbonate plastic protects the inner layers that contain the data from damage. A layer of a highly reflective metal, usually aluminum, is used to reflect the laser that is used to read the data. The data itself is stored on another polycarbonate layer that contains teeny tiny little pits. The pits are arranged in spiral tracks, just like a vinyl record. If you've ever seen one of those, and are about 100 nanometers deep and about 500 nanometers wide, the laser can detect the change in height by measuring changes in how the light is reflected.
What is a flame, really?
From a chemical perspective, a flame is the visible light product of an exothermic oxidation reaction. This reaction takes CH bonds and oxygen, O2, in the atmosphere and starts a radical chain reaction that keeps going as long as there is still fuel and oxygen around. Actually, bonds other than just CH bonds can give rise to burning. That's just what's happening during the burning of objects you're most familiar with, like candles and wood fires.
What is liquid smoke?
It's actually exactly what it sounds like, as crazy as that is. Smoke from a wood-burning fire is blown into condensers, which collect many of the volatile chemicals in smoke. This mixture is then diluted with water. It's used to cure bacon and flavor many other foods.
What is an ionic bond?
Attraction between two oppositely charged ions.
How does fluoride work in toothpaste?
Fluoride, usually in the form of sodium fluoride, NaF, in toothpaste, strengthens the enamel in your teeth. But how does it do that? Let's back up a bit first. Enamel is the outer layer of your teeth. And it's made of a mineral called hydroxyapatite. It's a calcium phosphate structure with one hydroxyl group, Ca5, PO4, 3, O. This mineral dissolves in the presence of acids, which is exactly what bacteria generate when they metabolize sugars in your mouth. This is how cavities form when you drink soda. Fluoride ions help rebuild your tooth's enamel by replacing the hydroxyl group in the apatite mineral. The new mineral, Ca5, PO4, 3F, or fluorapatite, is more stable in the presence of acids, so your teeth are more resistant to decay.
What's hair made of?
Keratin is the major component of hair and nails. It's a protein that makes up the outer layer of your skin, your hair, fingernails, and toenails. Actually, keratin is everywhere in the animal world, the hooves, claws, and horns of most mammals. The scales of reptiles, the shells of turtles, and the feathers, beaks, and claws of birds. Many copies of this protein molecule assemble into a large helical structure that provides the structure and rigidity to the material. Keratin proteins contain lots of sulfur atoms in the form of cysteine amino acid residues. These sulfur atoms can form linkages between keratin strands and between the larger helices that are formed, leading ultimately to a curling of the hair strand. Yep, you guessed it, the more disulfide bonds there are, the curlier your hair will be. Hair straighteners work by breaking these disulfide bonds, relaxing the hair to a straight conformation.
Are all the carbon-carbon bonds in benzene the same length?
Yes, but you might not think so by looking at a single line structure of benzene. The actual structure of benzene is a combination of two structures, shown below.
Who first realized that oxygen gas, O2, was required for fire?
Philo of Byzantium in the 2nd century BCE was the first to observe, or at least the first to record such an observation. That if you placed a jar on top of a candle with water around its base, some water would be drawn up into the jar as the candle burned and eventually went out once all the oxygen was consumed. Although the experiment was well designed, he ended up with an incorrect conclusion about the process. Robert Boyle repeated the experiment but replaced the candle with a mouse. Seriously, and noticed the water also rose up the container. From this experiment he correctly inferred that whatever the component in air was, he called it nitroairus, it was needed for both combustion and respiration. Robert Hooke, and others, likely produced oxygen gas in the 17th century, but didn't realize it was an element as the phlogiston theory, see below, was in vogue at the time. So to really realize that oxygen gas was required for fire, it first had to be, well, discovered.
How is recycled plastic used to make fleece?
Fleece can be made from polyethylene terephthalate, PET, bottles. The first step is to wash and then mechanically crush the bottles, shaping the plastic into small chips. The chips can then be heated and forced through tiny holes in a metal plate, called a spinneret, which forms fibers that harden as they cool to room temperature. These fibers are wound onto a spool as they are formed, and they can subsequently be stretched to improve their strength. Machines can then be used to texturize and cut the fibers to their desired length and be used to make fleece cloth for clothing, blankets, etc.
What is a heat of formation?
The standard heat of formation for a substance is the change in enthalpy associated with its formation of 1 mole. See History of Chemistry. Of a substance from its elements with the constituent elements in their standard states, see Analytical Chemistry.
What is a voltmeter?
A device used to measure an amount of electricity.
What is a proton?
Protons are subatomic particles that carry a positive charge. They are substantially heavier than electrons, roughly 1,836 times heavier, and carry a positive charge equal in magnitude to that carried by the electron. Protons are found in the nucleus of every atom, and the number of protons present in an atom determines its chemical properties, or, in other words, determines what element it is.
How does an air freshener work?
Although there are many different types of air fresheners, most of them are simply perfume dispensers. The perfume is a strong-smelling substance that has a pleasant odor, which masks the stink.
What is ortho?
Term used to describe two substituents on an aromatic ring that are bonded to adjacent positions.
What is the Coulomb's law?
Law describing the force between a pair of charged particles separated by a distance.
What are supercritical fluids, and why can these be useful as green solvents?
A supercritical fluid is a substance that has reached sufficiently high temperature and pressure to be beyond a critical point on the phase diagram. See macroscopic properties. This critical value of temperature and pressure will be different for each substance, and it corresponds to a set of conditions beyond which the distinction between the liquid and gas phases of matter is no longer clear. That is to say, beyond this value, the density and other properties of the substance can be changed continuously and readily, with changes in the temperature and pressure of the system. This makes for useful green solvents because having the ability to tune the density, solubility properties, and diffusivity of the supercritical fluid allows for reaction or extraction conditions to be sensitively manipulated. Let's consider one supercritical fluid that has drawn particular interest, carbon dioxide, or CO2. Some of the advantages of CO2 as a supercritical fluid are that it cannot be oxidized. It is aprotic, and it does not tend to participate in reactions involving free radicals. This makes carbon dioxide robust toward undergoing chemical reactions itself. And it also means that it is relatively benign as a contaminant, ignoring its role as a greenhouse gas, for the moment. However, CO2 is a gas at ambient temperature and pressure, and thus, to serve as a good solvent, it must be used at elevated pressures and/or temperatures. At varied temperatures and pressures, supercritical CO2 is also capable of dissolving a wide range of chemical compounds and is miscible with gases in almost any proportion. Supercritical CO2 can also often be recycled as a solvent, and thus does not tend to generate large amounts of waste. Indeed, carbon dioxide can also be used as a solvent in its liquid form, but it then loses several of the advantages with regard to the tunability of its properties that we mentioned above.
What is the theory of phlogiston?
In 1667, a scientist named Johann Joachim Beecher introduced the theory of phlogiston as an explanation for the various observations scientists had made regarding combustion. These observations include the fact that some objects can burn while others cannot, and that a flame in a sealed container can go out before the combustible material is consumed. Beecher proposed that a weightless, or almost weightless, substance called phlogiston was present in all materials that could burn, and that this phlogiston was the substance being given off during combustion. If a candle placed in a closed container went out, Beecher said this was because the phlogiston from the candle was moving into the air, and that the air could only absorb a certain concentration of phlogiston before it became saturated and could no longer absorb more phlogiston from the candle. Another tenet of this theory was that the purpose of breathing was to remove phlogiston from the body. Air that had been used for combustion couldn't be used to breathe then because it was already saturated with phlogiston.
What are Bronsted acids and bases?
The Bronsted acid/base definition differs somewhat from the Lewis definition. Rather than focusing on electron acceptors and donors, the Bronsted definition deals with donating or accepting H and atoms, protons, in chemical reactions. A Bronsted acid is a species that tends to donate protons in a chemical reaction, while a Bronsted base is a species that tends to accept those protons. To accept protons, a Bronsted base must typically have at least one pair of non-bonding valence electrons.
What is an isotactic polymer?
A polymer in which all substituents are located on the same side of the backbone.
What is miscible?
Liquids that when mixed form a single phase.
Can eating carrots help your eyesight?
It does seem likely that carrots help your eyesight, so it's not a myth. Carrots, and other colorful vegetables, tend to have a lot of vitamin A. And vitamin A helps the retina to stay healthy and working well. This is because it helps to generate rhodopsin, which is a light-sensing molecule located in the retina. Developing a deficiency of vitamin A can actually lead to night blindness.
Why do farts stink?
Farts are mostly nitrogen, N2, but that's an odorless gas. The smelly molecules in farts are mostly sulfur-containing compounds that reek like rotten eggs. Other odoriferous compounds include scatol and indole.
Why did Carrie B. Mullis, United States, win the Nobel Prize for Chemistry?
For contributions to the developments of methods within DNA-based chemistry for his invention of the polymerase chain reaction. PCR, method, and Michael Smith, Canada. For contributions to the developments of methods within DNA-based chemistry for his fundamental contributions to the establishment of oligonucleotide-based site-directed mutagenesis and its development for protein studies. Mullis was awarded the prize for developing a widely used laboratory method called the polymerase chain reaction, PCR, method. PCR allows the use of relatively simple lab equipment to generate millions of copies of a sample of DNA in the time span of only a few hours. This has found diverse applications in a large number of laboratories. It can be used, for example, to generate copies of DNA from fossils of organisms that are long since extinct. Smith shared the prize with Mullis for his work manipulating the genetic code. In cells, proteins are produced based on sequences of nucleotides contained within the organism's DNA. These sequences dictate the sequences of amino acids that will be incorporated into a protein. Smith developed a method to selectively manipulate DNA to alter the amino acid sequences of the proteins that are produced.
Do polymers have stereochemistry like small molecules?
Yes. The most common example is polypropylene. This polymer has a methyl group attached to the backbone of the polymer. If the methyl groups are all on the same side of the chain, the stereochemistry is known as isotactic, top structure below. If the arrangement of the methyl groups alternates which side of the chain it's on, the polymer is called syndiotactic, bottom structure below. If there's no order at all to the substituents, we call the polymer atactic.
Why did Ernst Otto Fischer, Federal Republic of Germany, and Geoffrey Wilkinson, United Kingdom, win the Nobel Prize for Chemistry?
For their pioneering work, performed independently on the chemistry of the organometallic, so-called sandwich compounds. Fischer and Wilkinson received the prize for their role in elucidating the basic properties surrounding bonding and reactivity in organometallic complexes, with a particular focus on their work with organometallic sandwich compounds, which involve a metal center sandwiched between two ligands. This prize was somewhat special in that it was openly recognized that the practical implications of their work were not readily obvious, but that the knowledge surrounding organometallic chemistry gained from their work would be invaluable to chemists in the future. Why did Paul J.
What is gamma radiation?
While alpha and beta radiation is the loss of some particle from an atom, gamma radiation is the release of electromagnetic radiation, called gamma rays. This energy is typically of a high frequency, greater than 1019 Hz, which means its high energy, greater than 100 keV, and can cause significant damage. Gamma radiation can easily penetrate deep into your body. Unlike alpha and beta particles, causing damage to your cells and the DNA inside them. Sometimes this damage is useful, though. And some radiation therapies for cancer treatment make use of gamma radiation to kill the malignant cells.
What is an atomic weight?
The average mass of an atom of a given element.
What is a nucleotide?
A biochemical molecule consisting of a nucleobase, a sugar molecule, and one phosphate group.
What is a galaxy?
A galaxy is a huge system consisting of stars, planets, gas, dust, and lots of other interstellar media. The galaxy we live in is called the Milky Way. Galaxies have a lot of stars, smallest have roughly 10 million, while the largest have 100 trillion. All of the stuff in a galaxy orbits around the center of mass of that galaxy.
What is a thermoplastic?
If a polymer becomes soft when it is heated, and then hardens again when cooled, it's known as a thermoplastic. The temperature at which the polymer softens depends on what it's made of and on the size of the polymer chains. Thermoplastics are easy to recycle because they can be remolded when they're hot.
What are the goals of green chemistry?
If you have read through the 12 principles of green chemistry, you will likely have realized that the focus of green chemistry rests on minimizing the impact of the development, manufacturing, and use of chemical products on the environment. While these 12 principles may not enumerate every possible method for reducing the impact of chemicals on the environment, they provide a foundation for the outcomes that green chemistry seeks to achieve.
What is Gibbs free energy?
Gibbs free energy is a quantity that describes the amount of useful work. See physical and theoretical chemistry, that can be obtained from a system at a constant temperature and pressure. In the context of chemical reactions, changes in Gibbs free energy will typically dictate whether or not a reaction is favorable.
What happens when you fire a wet clay pot in a kiln?
Before the clay is placed in the kiln, it is usually dried in the air for at least several days. This first step has already removed the majority of the water. But there will still be some trapped inside the clay. As it is heated in the kiln, the remaining water will turn to steam as it evaporates from the clay. If it is heated too fast, it may turn to steam while still trapped in the clay and cause the pot to explode. As the pot continues to heat, some of the organic materials in the clay will burn off, which is necessary for the clay to form a strong final structure. The next stage is an interesting one. And to understand it, we need to consider the chemical composition of clay. Clay consists of a unit of alumina, Al2O3, and 2 units of silica, SiO2, complexed with 2 molecules of water. So even after all of the excess water has evaporated away, there is still a significant quantity of water that remains chemically bonded within the clay. At this point, water accounts for about 14% of the mass of the clay. As the temperature continues to increase, those remaining water molecules begin to be released, and they too evaporate away. This is another step where the heating must be done slowly. Otherwise, the water can create steam pockets within the clay that will expand and eventually explode. Other changes occur as well, such as changes in the crystalline structure of the silica that will occur multiple times as the pot is heated. Eventually, the glass-making oxides within the clay melt, and the clay will fuse into a ceramic material. The materials that melt relatively easily will tend to fill in remaining empty spaces, strengthening the final product. One final note is that changes in the crystalline structure of the silica will also occur upon cooling. And one must take care to cool the pot sufficiently slowly so that these changes don't cause cracks to develop during cooling.
How does blood clotting take place?
Platelets in the blood send a message to constrict blood vessels in the area surrounding a wound. Platelets gather to block the flow of blood coming out. At the same time, a chemical messenger called prothrombin activates an enzyme called thrombin, which then produces a species called fibrin. Fibrin forms threads to block the wound even better.
What is binding affinity?
Binding affinity is used to characterize how strongly two molecules interact. Typically this will be a ligand and a receptor site, perhaps in a protein. Another common example would be a drug molecule binding to a receptor site somewhere in the brain. In simple cases where one drug molecule, D, binds to one receptor molecule, R, to form a complex, Dr, the binding affinity can be described by the equilibrium constant, Keq equals dr/dr. The binding affinity can be looked at as a measure of how strongly a molecule binds to its receptor site. If a drug has higher affinity for its binding site, less of the drug will be required to achieve a response. Typically, scientists designing pharmaceuticals would like a drug to have a high binding affinity for its receptor so that it can effect a strong response.
What is an electronic wave function?
A mathematical description used to describe the electrons in a chemical system.
Why did Derek H. R. Barton, United Kingdom, and Odd Hassel, Norway, win the Nobel Prize for Chemistry?
For their contributions to the development of the concept of conformation and its application in chemistry. Barton and Hassel earned the prize for their work surrounding the conformational analysis of molecules. While we draw a molecule on paper in a specific orientation and conformation, there are, in truth, typically many accessible conformations to a given molecule. This is especially true for floppy molecules. And these are where conformational analysis can be particularly insightful and important. Their work drew attention to the importance of rotations and other conformational changes in chemistry, particularly with regard to organic molecules. They showed that reactivity can actually be significantly influenced by the conformation of a molecule, and that conformational changes may be necessary to promote reactivity or allow for a reaction to take place. Why did Louis F.
What is electron paramagnetic resonance spectroscopy?
Electron paramagnetic resonance, EPR, spectroscopy, also known as electron spin resonance. ESR, spectroscopy, is a method used to probe unpaired electrons in a molecule. This method is fairly similar to nuclear magnetic resonance, NMR, see the modern chemical lab. but it involves exciting electronic spin states instead of nuclear ones. One downside to this technique, relative to NMR, is that the majority of molecules do not contain unpaired electrons and thus cannot be studied using EPR. On the other hand, the lack of interfering signals from most solvents and other molecules can very often be an advantage for the same reason.
Are all polymers linear chains?
No, and this is another way that chemists classify these really big molecules. The major types of polymer shapes, technical term. Topology, are linear, branched, and cross-linked networks. Linear polymers are chains of monomers joined together, like a noodle or a rope. If there is a point along a polymer chain where a second chain starts, like a fork in the road, this arrangement is referred to as branched.
Why did Osamu Shimomura, Japan, Martin Chalfie, United States, and Roger Y. Tsien, United States, win the Nobel Prize for Chemistry?
For the discovery and development of the green fluorescent protein, GFP. These three scientists received the prize for their work. With the protein simply called green fluorescent protein, or GFP. This protein was first observed way back in 1962 in a jellyfish. It eventually became a very important molecule in the biological sciences, as clever researchers have found ways to use GFP to study otherwise invisible chemical processes. Shimomura, Chalfie, and Tsien were at the forefront of the major discoveries that led to the understanding of GFP that researchers possess today.
What are molecular orbitals?
Molecular orbitals are different from atomic orbitals in that they cover several atoms and possibly even a whole molecule, while atomic orbitals originate from a single atom. Molecular orbitals are formed from combinations of the atomic orbitals. Because they allow electrons to occupy the space between the atoms in a molecule, they can provide a very useful description of chemical bonds holding atoms together.
What is a solution?
A liquid mixture containing multiple components, typically with one major component and one or more minor components.
How is analytical chemistry used in medicine?
Analytical chemistry techniques are routinely used in many areas of medicine. When your blood is drawn, for example, the doctors use techniques borrowed from analytical chemistry to determine levels of several analytes in your body, including cholesterol, vitamins, glucose, and white blood cells. Analysis of tissue samples and other biological fluids is also based on analytical techniques. Other examples of medically related applications include tests for illegal drugs and steroids. Glucose sensors used by diabetic patients, or to check for toxic substances in your body if you are exposed to hazardous chemicals.
What is a bond angle?
The angle relating the orientation of two bonds connecting three atoms.
What makes mercury so dangerous?
Mercury can be absorbed through the skin, making it particularly dangerous to handle. Organometallic mercury compounds, like dimethylmercury, CH3HgCH3, are particularly dangerous and have caused the deaths of a number of laboratory research chemists. Most research on this most toxic of mercury compounds has ceased. Be careful cleaning up that broken thermometer.
Why did Ahmed Swail, Egypt/United States, win the Nobel Prize for Chemistry?
For his studies of the transition states of chemical reactions using femtosecond spectroscopy. Swail was awarded the prize for his work using ultrafast femtosecond spectroscopy to study chemical reactions in real time. That is to say, on the timescale on which they actually take place. Swail's earliest experiments in this area looked at iodocyanide and sodium iodide. He was the first to be able to observe the dissociation and recombination of a chemical species as it actually took place. His great advances in spectroscopic techniques revolutionized the field, and continue to do so today.
What is an herbal medicine?
Herbal medicines are any plants or plant extracts used for treating ailments, aches, pain, or discomfort. They can range from culinary remedies, like chicken soup for the common cold, to calming extracts, like mint tea, to eating whole herbs. Every ancient civilization seems to have discovered the use of plants as medicines in one form or another. Even as far back as 5,000 years ago, humans were using herbal medicines, as evidenced by herbs being found alongside well-preserved, mummified humans like Ötzi the Iceman.
How are the Fahrenheit, Celsius, and Kelvin temperature scales related?
The Celsius and Kelvin scales use the same size degree. Incremental scaling is the technical term, but set their zero values at different absolute numbers. Let's explain that sentence a bit more. If you go up by 1 degree Celsius or 1 degree Kelvin, you've raised the temperature the same amount, but 0 degrees Celsius, the temperature at which water freezes, is 273.15 K. Thus the two scales are offset from one another by 273.15. Fahrenheit is completely different though. Water freezes at 32 degrees Fahrenheit, and a change of 1 degree on the Fahrenheit scale is equal to a change of 0.55 degrees Celsius.
What is a Gaussian distribution?
A Gaussian distribution is a type of probability distribution that characterizes the distribution of a randomly distributed variable about a single mean, average, value. This is the most commonly encountered type of distribution in statistical analysis. So it is good to be at least a little familiar with it.
Can I think of chemical bonds as springs between atoms?
Chemical bonds can be thought of as springs holding together the atoms in a bond. When atoms in a bond are stretched or compressed from their equilibrium separation, the bond provides a force to pull the atoms back together or to keep them from getting too close. For relatively small displacements, the bond actually provides a force that is physically very similar to that of a spring connecting two objects. This model of a spring as a chemical bond can be very useful for getting an intuitive idea of how a chemical bond connects atoms in a molecule.
What are some applications of functionally graded materials?
Recall from above that a functionally graded material is one that varies in one or more properties throughout its dimensions. These constitute a relatively young class of materials with promising applications in a variety of areas. For example, the living tissues in your body, including your bones, are classified as natural, functionally graded materials, so if scientists want to develop materials capable of replacing these, they are looking to develop a functionally graded material. They are also useful in aerospace applications, where materials that can withstand a large thermal, temperature, gradient are needed. Functionally graded materials are commonly found in energy conversion devices and have also been used in gas turbine engines. They can also be good at preventing the propagation of cracks through the volume of a material, which makes them promising candidates for defense applications like developing bullet-resistant materials to create armors for humans and vehicles.
What are some of the most harmful organic pollutants toward the environment?
The EPA provides a list of 12 particularly persistent organic pollutants to watch out for. The list includes aldrin, chloridane, dichlorophenyl trichloroethane, DDT, dieldrin, endrin, heptachlor, hexachlorobenzene, Myrex, toxaphene, polychlorinated biphenyls, polychlorinated dibenzopdioxins, and polychlorinated dibenzofurans. The EPA has colloquially named this group of compounds as the Dirty Dozen.
What types of energy levels exist in molecules?
There are three main types of energy levels that physical chemists are concerned with. These are electronic, vibrational, and rotational energies. Changes in electronic energy levels occur when an electron undergoes a transition from one molecular orbital to another. Vibrational energy levels are associated with vibrations of chemical bonds in the molecule. And rotational energy levels involve the molecule rotating in space. As you could probably guess, atoms don't have vibrational energy levels since there aren't chemical bonds present in single atoms. Physical chemists can often learn about the structure and reactivity of molecules by studying the transitions between these energy levels.
What is the density of a material?
Density is the mass, or weight, of a material divided by a unit of volume. Water, for example, has a density of 1.0 g/cm3, 1.0 gram per cubic centimeter.
What is fiberglass?
Fiberglass is a polymer made from a plastic matrix that is reinforced by fibers of glass. It is a popular material because it is inexpensive to make, and its strength and weight properties compare favorably against those of metals for many applications. Fiberglass has a wide range of applications and is commonly used in glider aircraft, boats, cars, showers and bathtubs, roofs, pipes, and surfboards.
How long ago was the light we see from stars emitted?
To figure out how long ago the light we see from stars was emitted, we have to know roughly how far away the star is and use the known speed of light, approximately 3 × 108 meters per second. The Sun is roughly 150 million kilometers from the Earth, from which we can calculate that sunlight reaching the Earth left the Sun roughly 8 minutes ago. The distance to the next nearest star is much farther, roughly 410 × 1011 kilometers from Earth. This translates into a time of over 4 years between when light leaves this star and when it reaches telescopes on Earth. Keep in mind that this is the next nearest star, so all others are even farther away. This also means that, if we see a star explode, it really happened many years ago.
What is a bimolecular reaction?
A reaction that involves two molecules in the rate-determining transition state.
What is the stoichiometry of a reaction?
The stoichiometry of a reaction is closely tied to the idea of the conservation of matter. It tells us the ratio in which the molecules react. Again, using the example at the beginning of this chapter, the reaction stoichiometry 1:2:1. 2 describes the ratio in which methane and oxygen react to form carbon dioxide and water.
What is osmosis?
Osmosis is the movement of solvent molecules in a solution to establish an equal concentration of solute throughout the solution. Solvent molecules move from areas of low solute concentration to areas of high solute concentration, which tends to remove any gradient in solute concentration.
What is electronegativity?
A measure describing how strongly atoms attract electrons.
How do mood rings work?
Mood rings change color based on your body temperature. The piece that changes color is a liquid crystal thermometer, which is the same technology that is used in some disposable medical thermometers as well as the adhesive thermometers commonly used in aquariums.
What gives a food its taste?
Molecules, of course. You probably learned in school that there are 4 basic tastes: sweet, bitter, sour, and salty. Your science textbook probably also had a diagram like the one on the following page, showing that your bitter taste buds are located on the back of your tongue, and sweet is tasted on the tip. Wrong. 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 Not only are there at least 5 basic tastes, but they're basically spread out evenly across your tongue. The 5 basic tastes are the 4 you know from elementary school. And umami. If you grew up eating Western cuisine, umami tastes like message, or maybe you just think Asian food. There is debate as to whether there is a 6th basic taste bud that senses fat. Or maybe another sensor for piquance, spiciness. But not even those 5, or 6, or 7. Basic tastes fully account for all the sensations you get during eating. Wine is probably the best example, if you drink wine, of course.
What is condensation?
Conversion of a gas into a liquid.
What is the parietal lobe for?
Your parietal lobe controls your speech, visual perception, pain, and touch perception. Spatial orientation, like knowing what direction is up, and other cognitive processes. As you can probably tell by now, there is some degree of overlap between the broad types of functions carried out by different parts of the brain.
What is a rare earth element?
Term for the lanthanides and actinides, including scandium and yttrium.
Can reactions take place in gas, liquid, and solid phases?
Absolutely. Bimolecular, two species, reactions taking place in the gas phase and in solutions are quite similar in that they involve random diffusion of reactant molecules until they collide, at which point a reaction may take place. For reactions involving solids, the surface of a solid is often reacting with another species that is present at the interface between the solid and a gas or liquid with which it is in contact. An example would be your car rusting to form oxides.
What is a microwave?
Electromagnetic radiation with wavelengths of 1 mm to 1 meter. Just longer than infrared radiation, but not as long as radio waves.
What are some examples of biological feedstocks?
It is desirable to use biomass, or plant-based materials, as feedstocks for chemical synthesis and energy production. Through photosynthesis, plants are able to efficiently capture and store energy from sunlight. And finding ways to use biomass for green chemistry applications is extremely advantageous in advancing the goals of the field. Sources of biomass can be grouped into several categories, including cellulose, lipids, lignin, terpenes, and proteins. Cellulose is often found in structural parts of plants. Lignin is a polymer often found along with cellulose in wood-like parts of plants. Lipids and lipid oils are often extracted from seeds and soybeans. Terpenes are found in pine trees, rubber trees, and a selection of other plants as well. Proteins are found in relatively small quantities in many types of plants and also in larger quantities in animals. Some efforts are also underway to use genetic transplants to create plants that produce increased amounts of proteins. One of the primary challenges in using biological feedstocks to produce chemicals or energy involves separation and purification of the desired materials.
What is isobaric?
With constant pressure.
Why did Otto Hahn, Germany, win the Nobel Prize for Chemistry?
For his discovery of the fission of heavy nuclei. Hans and his colleagues' work discovered nuclear fission, and in particular that uranium could be split in a chain reaction by nuclear fission. This discovery was perhaps recognized as much for its importance as it was for its potential danger to society if not properly used and controlled, and Hahn himself was keenly aware of the potential for danger. Nonetheless, this discovery paved the way for much future research into nuclear chemistry, as well as for the development of modern nuclear reactors.
What fraction of plastics used in the United States are recycled?
In 2008, about 6.5% of the plastic waste generated was recycled. Roughly another 7.7% was burned to generate energy, while the majority of the remaining waste went into landfills. It is interesting to note that, as plastic production has continued to increase, the fraction of plastics being recycled has decreased. In some cases, this may simply be due to the increasing volume of plastic products or to the fact that it is not easy to build a profitable business around recycling plastics.